The studio is immersed in a heavy silence. Lights focus on the center stage, where 3 chairs await their occupants. The audience, comprised of more than 200 people, can barely contain their anxiety. Today is no ordinary episode. What is about to be revealed goes beyond any typical family conflict. It's a scandal that remained buried for 4 decades, involving lives that were irrevocably altered before their first breaths. Dr. Phil McGraw walks to the center of the stage with his characteristic posture, firm shoulders, penetrating gaze, a mixture of authority and calculated compassion. He holds a brown envelope in his hands, the kind of envelope that usually contains documents no one wants to see, but everyone needs to know about. Before beginning, he observes the audience for a long moment, allowing the tension to settle like thick fog. "Good morning, everyone." His voice resonates through the studio, deep and controlled. What you are about to witness today is one of the most disturbing cases that has ever come through this stage in more than 23 years of this program. We're talking about a systematic betrayal of the most sacred trust that exists, the trust between a mother who has just given birth and the medical professionals responsible for protecting her newborn baby. He pauses, letting the words sink in. For 6 years, between 1982 and 1987, at the maternity ward of County General Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, more than 20 babies were deliberately switched. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't negligence. It was intentional. And the person responsible is here today, ready to confess for the first time publicly what she did and why. The camera glides to capture the shocked expressions of the audience. Some cover their mouths with their hands. Others lean forward, incredulous. Please welcome Margaret Collins. An elderly woman enters the stage. Margaret is 72 years old, but looks every day of that age and perhaps a few years more. Her gray hair is pulled back in a tight bun. She wears a navy blue cardigan over a simple white blouse and gray dress pants. Her eyes are red, swollen from recent crying or lack of sleep, probably both. Her hands tremble visibly as she sits in the first chair. Beside her, an older man, her husband Robert, takes his place. He appears disoriented, as if still processing the bomb that exploded in their 50-year marriage. And now, one of the victims of these switches, a woman who grew up believing she knew her identity, her family, her own history, until a DNA ancestry test revealed a devastating truth. Please welcome Sarah Reynolds. Sarah enters the stage, and the difference between her and Margaret is striking. Where Margaret appears bent by the weight of guilt, Sarah radiates controlled fury. She is 42 years old, blonde haircut in a professional style. Wearing an elegant suit, she wants to appear composed, wants to appear strong. But her eyes betray the inner storm. She sits in the third chair, as far as possible from Margaret, and deliberately doesn't look in her direction. Dr. Phil returns to the center, positioning himself between the two women like a mediator between past and present, between crime and consequence. Sarah, let's start with you. Tell us how your life completely changed 8 months ago. Sarah takes a deep breath, her fingers tightly interlaced in her lap. I always knew I was different from my family, she begins, her voice initially weak but gaining strength. My father, the man I called father, was tall, dark-haired, Italian. My mother was Irish, natural red head, freckled, and I was blonde, light blue eyes, completely different bone structure. Everyone joked that I was the family's genetic anomaly. My parents said I took after some distant relative. But did you believe that? I wanted to believe it, she responds, and for the first time her voice falters. Because the alternative was unthinkable. My parents loved me. I had a happy childhood. Why would I question that? So what changed? My daughter gave me one of those DNA kits for Christmas. You know, those from Ancestry, 23andMe. She thought it would be fun to discover our European roots, maybe find distant cousins. I spit in a little tube, sent it by mail, and forgot about it for 2 months. Sarah stops, swallowing hard. The audience is completely silent. When the results came back, I wasn't matching with my mother. 0% shared DNA.0. Initially, I thought it was a lab error. I redid the test. Same result. That's when I realized either I was adopted and no one ever told me, or something much worse had happened. Doctor Phil approaches, his voice softer now. And your parents, how did they react? My mother had already passed away 5 years ago, ovarian cancer. My father, he was devastated. He swore he didn't know anything. He insisted I was the baby they brought home from County General Hospital on March 15th, 1983. He showed me my birth certificate, hospital photos, everything. But it wasn't you. No, Sarah confirms, and now tears begin to flow. The baby who should have been Sarah Marie Reynolds went to another family, and I don't even know who I really am. My real name, my biological family, nothing. Before we continue with this impactful story, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming revelations from Dr. Phil. Leave in the comments where you're watching from and what you think will happen in this case. Your opinion is very important for us to continue bringing this exclusive content that transforms lives. Dr. Phil slowly turns to Margaret. The tension in the studio is palpable. Every person present knows that what comes next is going to be brutal. Margaret, you heard Sarah's story. A woman whose entire identity was stolen from her before she could even open her eyes for the first time. And you're here today because I did it. Margaret interrupts, her voice hoarse. I switched Sarah's baby, and it wasn't just her. It was 23 in total, 23 families. A shocked murmur runs through the audience. Someone lets out a muffled scream. Dr. Phil raises his hand asking for silence. 23, he repeats, letting the number hang in the air. For 6 years, you worked in the maternity ward of County General Hospital. You had unrestricted access to the nursery. You were the person mothers trusted to bring them their babies for breastfeeding, to bathe them, to care for them. And you used that trust to do what? Exactly. Explain the process to me. Margaret wipes her eyes with a crumpled tissue. Her hands still tremble. It was easier than you'd imagine, she begins, and there's something disturbing about the way she describes it, almost clinical, as if describing a routine medical procedure. In the 80s, security wasn't like it is today. There were no cameras, no electronic bracelets. The babies only had plastic ID bracelets with names written by hand. I worked the night shift, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. That's when there was less supervision, fewer nurses, fewer doctors circulating. Continue, Dr. Phil orders, his voice hard as steel. I would wait until around 3 in the morning. Most mothers were sleeping, exhausted from labor. The nursery had between 8 and 12 babies on any given night. I would switch the bracelets. I'd choose the babies born on the same date, approximately at the same time, preferably the same sex and similar weight. I'd remove both bracelets, put them back on the wrong babies, manually update the records. The next day, when mothers received their babies, they believed they were taking home their biological children. Sarah is openly crying now, her shoulders shaking. How can you be so casual about this? You're talking about lives, about identities. Margaret finally looks at Sarah, and there's something in her eyes, not exactly remorse, but a deep and ancient sadness. I know what I did. I know it's unforgivable. Unforgivable, Doctor. Phil intervenes, his voice rising in volume. Margaret, you're not understanding the magnitude of what you did. You didn't steal objects. You didn't steal money. You stole entire lives. You condemned 23 pairs of parents to raise children who weren't biologically theirs without even knowing. You condemned 23 children to grow up with wrong medical histories, false identities, without knowing their true genetic roots. Some of these people may have siblings they never met. Half of their family tree was erased. He pauses, moving closer to Margaret, forcing her to face him. And beyond all of this, beyond the monumental cruelty of what you did, there's another question. Why? Because nobody does this without a reason. Nobody systematically switches 23 babies over 6 years by accident. So tell me, Margaret Collins, what the hell was going through your head? The silence that follows is deafening. Margaret opens her mouth, closes it, opens it again. Tears stream down her wrinkled face. Robert, her husband, places a hesitant hand on her shoulder, but she pulls away from the touch. I was trying to find my son, she finally whispers. Doctor. Phil frowns. Explain that. My son, Michael. I gave birth in 1980 at the same hospital where I worked later, and I always believed, that my baby was switched, that the baby I took home wasn't my Michael. The revelation hits the audience like a collective punch. Even Sarah stops crying, looking at Margaret with a mixture of horror and confusion. You're telling me, Doctor. Phil articulates carefully that you switched 23 babies because you think your baby was switched. That's insanity, Margaret. Do you have any proof of this? He didn't look like me. Or Robert. The eyes were wrong. The face shape was wrong. IKNEW. A mother knows. No, doctor. Phil cuts firmly. A mother sometimes imagines. A mother sometimes projects. Did you do any DNA test? Margaret shakes her head, miserable. At the time it didn't exist, and when the technology became available, my son, the boy I raised as Michael, was already 30 years old. He had his own life. I couldn't destroy that. But you were willing to destroy 23 other families. Sarah interrupts, her voice sharp as glass. You were willing to destroy me, to destroy my parents. All because you had a feeling? It wasn't just a feeling. Margaret responds, suddenly defensive. I spent years searching, years observing the children who were born in the same period as Michael, trying to find one that looked like me, like my family. And when I was offered the job in the maternity ward 2 years later, I thought maybe I could investigate what had gone wrong, understand how the system worked, how my baby could have been switched. Doctor. Phil leans forward. So you started working there in 1982 to investigate your son's supposed switch? Yes. I thought if I could understand the system, maybe I could find proof. Maybe I could find which family had my real Michael. But instead of finding proof, you found Dr. Richardson. Doctor. Phil states. Margaret's face pales. How do you? We'll get to that. So you started working there to investigate. What happened next? Margaret's voice drops to barely a whisper. Dr. Richardson. He noticed me. Noticed I was asking questions, looking through old records during my breaks. One night, about 6 months after I started, he pulled me aside. He said he knew what I was looking for. He said he could help me. Help you how? He said that baby switches happen more often than people knew. That sometimes it was intentional to give babies to families who could provide better lives. He said if I helped him with a special program he was running, he would help me find Michael. A special program, doctor. Phil repeats flatly. You mean an illegal adoption ring? I didn't know that's what it was at first. Margaret protests. He made it sound noble, like we were helping children escape poverty, addiction, abuse. He showed me files of mothers, teenagers, drug users, women in terrible situations. Then he showed me files of families desperate for children, educated, stable, loving families who couldn't have children of their own. He said we could make sure babies went to the right homes. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him, because he promised that if I helped him, he would use his connections to find Michael. He said he had access to records from other hospitals, that he could trace where babies went. I was desperate. Doctor. Phil's expression hardens. So you participated in baby trafficking because you were promised information about your son. Did he ever give you that information? No. He kept saying he was still looking, that it would take time. Meanwhile, I kept switching babies according to his instructions. He would tell me which babies to switch, which families were approved. I thought I was helping. You weren't helping. You were committing crimes. And the worst part, doctor. Phil's voice rises. You were doing all of this to find a son who may never have been switched in the first place. Margaret, did it ever occur to you that Michael was actually your biological son? That you created this entire fantasy to explain why he didn't look exactly like you expected? No. Margaret's voice breaks. I know my son was switched. I know it. Based on what? Your feelings. Margaret, genetics are unpredictable. Babies don't always look like their parents. You destroyed 23 families based on a delusion. It wasn't a delusion. Margaret sobs. Michael felt it too. When he died 6 months ago, I found his diary. He had done a DNA test. He discovered the truth, that he wasn't my biological son. So I was right. My baby was switched. The revelation silences Dr. Phil for a moment. Michael confirmed through DNA that he wasn't your biological son. Yes, and he wrote that knowing he was switched, knowing he didn't truly belong to our family, it ate away at him his entire life. He never told me because he didn't want to hurt me. But the pain of living a lie, it destroyed him. And when I realized my son suffered so much from being switched, I understood what I had done to 23 other people. They deserved to know the truth. Doctor. Phil shakes his head slowly. So your son's death and his diary finally made you confront your crimes. That's why you're here. That's why you came forward. Yes. And you have evidence of what you did. Evidence of the switches. Margaret hesitates, then reaches into a large bag at her feet. She pulls out a rectangular object wrapped in plastic, a red-covered notebook, worn and stained by time. I kept records, she says, her voice almost inaudible. All these years. Names, dates, details. I think some part of me always knew that one day I would have to face what I did. Doctor. Phil extends his hand and she gives him the notebook. He holds it as if holding a live bomb. Slowly, with the audience watching in absolute silence, he removes the plastic and opens the first page. What he sees makes him freeze completely. His face, usually so controlled, so measured, registers genuine shock. He turns a page, then another, and another. His hands begin to tremble slightly. The camera zooms in on his expression as he reads, capturing every micro-reaction. Finally, Dr. Phil looks up. He looks at Margaret, then at Sarah, then at the production crew behind the cameras. Stop recording, he says, his voice low but unmistakable. Stop now. Dr. Phil. One of the producers calls from the control booth, confused. I said stop recording. He growls, with an intensity that shocks everyone present. Clear the audience. Now. This has ceased to be a television episode. It's a criminal investigation. Chaos erupts in the studio. The audience, initially confused, begins to stand and head to the exits under guidance from security. Sarah is frozen in place, looking at Dr. Phil with fear and confusion. Margaret is crying uncontrollably. Robert looks like he's about to faint. Dr. Phil walks directly to the main camera, even knowing it's no longer recording, and says something to someone that no one else can hear. The cameras are off. The audience has been removed. The vast studio, which moments ago was teeming with hundreds of people, now houses only 8 individuals. Dr. Phil, Margaret, Robert, Sarah, the security guards, an executive producer, and a network lawyer. Dr. Phil is sitting in a chair turned away from the cameras, the red notebook open in his lap. His expression is severe, deep lines marking his forehead. He reads in silence for several minutes while the others wait, tension growing like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Margaret, he finally says, his voice different now. There's no performance, no camera, just the raw voice of a man confronting something deeply disturbing. When you gave me this notebook, did you have any idea what it really contains? Margaret wipes her nose, her eyes red. I know it has the details of all the switches I made. Names, dates, baby weights, mother's room numbers. No, Doctor. Phil interrupts. There's more than that. Much more. You weren't working alone, were you? The silence that follows is absolute. Even the hum of electrical equipment seems to disappear. What do you mean? Margaret stammers, but there's something in her eyes, a flash of panic that confirms she knows exactly what he means. Drive. Phil stands, approaching her with the notebook open. Page 17. You wrote, Dr. Richardson approved the switch, said the Hendersons are a better family. Payment received, $500. Page 23. Dr. Richardson found another interested family. Suburban couple, can't have their own children. $1,500 this time. Page 31. Stop, Margaret whispers, but Dr. Phil doesn't stop. Page 31. Total of 12 switches this year. Dr. Richardson says we can expand. Hospital in Cincinnati also interested. Possible network. Margaret, you weren't just switching babies for some distorted personal quest. You were participating in an illegal adoption scheme. You were selling babies. Sarah lets out a sharp scream. Robert grabs the side of the chair, as if the floor were moving beneath his feet. It wasn't like that. Margaret protests weakly. I wasn't selling. Doctor. Richardson said the money was for compensation, to cover risks, to ensure that. To ensure what? That you would keep quiet. That you would keep providing babies for rich families who paid. Doctor. Phil is now inches from her face, his voice loaded with contained fury. Do you know what this is? Human trafficking. You traffic newborn children. And this Dr. Richardson, who I presume is Dr. Thomas Richardson, head of obstetrics at County General at the time. He orchestrated everything. He used you, and you let him. He said we were helping families. Margaret cries. He said we were giving children better homes, that the families who paid were vetted, were loving, were rich. Doctor. Phil corrects. And you know what the sickest part of all this is? Look at page 7. He turns the notebook so she can see, pointing to a specific entry. December 1980. Male baby. Mother. Margaret Collins. Switch approved by Dr. Richardson, receiving family, James and Patricia Winters of Shaker Heights. Payment, $2,500, the largest amount recorded up to that point. Margaret, your own son wasn't switched by accident. You were the first patient Dr. Richardson saw. Vulnerable nurse, emotionally unstable postpartum, and he tested the scheme on you. He deliberately switched your baby, and then, when you became convinced it was an error, he recruited you to help him do the same to other families. The sound that comes from Margaret isn't human. It's a primitive howl of pain, the sound of a person whose entire world has just imploded. Robert is crying now too, realizing that his wife was both perpetrator and victim, that the son they raised and lost wasn't biologically theirs, and that she knew, on some level. She always knew. Sarah is sitting in her chair, wrapping her arms around herself, rocking back and forth. So I was sold, she whispers. My parents paid for me. They paid to have a baby and didn't even know it was stolen. Doctor. Phil walks over to her, crouching down to be at eye level. When he speaks, his voice is gentle for the first time this terrible afternoon. Sarah, your parents, the parents who raised you, they didn't know. According to these notes, the receiving families believed they were participating in a completely legal private adoption. They paid legal fees to Dr. Richardson, who was actually pocketing the money. Your parents love you. That hasn't changed. But who am I really? Sarah asks, tears streaming down her face. If the family who raised me paid for an adoption they thought was legal, where are my real biological parents? Are they looking for me? Are they alive? Doctor? Phil returns to the notebook, searching. Sarah Marie Reynolds, born March 15, 1983 at 6:47 a.m. According to Margaret's notes, biological mother, Jennifer Hartley, 17 years old, single. The baby was switched with the daughter of Thomas and Catherine Dawson, but the Dawsons didn't know it was a switch. They thought they were taking home their biological baby. Your real baby, the original Sarah Reynolds, went to another couple through Dr. Richardson's scheme. And the baby who was biologically the Dawsons, you, was marked as Sarah Reynolds and given to your adoptive parents who paid for the adoption. It's a tangle so complex of switched identities, of children moved like pieces on a chessboard, that it takes several moments for everyone to process. Sarah isn't who she thought she was, but she is also not who her biological family thought she was, because that family received a completely different baby. It's a DNA puzzle that affected at least 6 families in her case alone. There's more, Doctor. Phil says, and there's a dark quality to his voice. Dr. Richardson died in 1994. Heart attack. But before he died, according to the last entries in this diary, he was under investigation. The IRS had started asking questions about unexplained deposits. The hospital was reviewing his practices. He knew he was about to be exposed, and he took the names of all the families involved to the grave. The network lawyer speaks for the first time, his voice tense. Except for this notebook. Margaret, do you realize you just handed over evidence of multiple state and federal crimes? Human trafficking, fraud, falsification of official documents. I know, Margaret says, and her voice is surprisingly firm now. I know what I did, and I know I'm going to pay for it. But you don't understand. They need to know. The 23 families, they deserve to know the truth, even if it's painful, even if they hate me, even if it destroys the lives they built. Because living a lie, living without knowing who you really are, it destroys you from the inside. It destroyed my Michael. It's destroying Sarah. And it's destroying 19 other people who don't even know their entire identities are false. Doctor. Phil looks at her for a long moment, then at the notebook in his hands, and finally at the turned-off camera. He makes a decision. We're going to need to involve the authorities immediately, and then we'll use this program, when appropriate, to help find the other victims, to give them the chance to know the truth if they want it. But this, he raises the notebook, this leaves my hands and goes straight to the Columbus police. Today, 6 months later, cameras roll again. But the studio looks different now, more somber, less theatrical. There's no audience. It's just Dr. Phil, sitting in a simple chair, looking directly at the camera. 6 months ago, we recorded one of the most disturbing episodes in the history of this program. He begins, his voice deep and measured. And for the first time in 23 years on air, I stopped recording. Not because I was being dramatic, not to create suspense, But because what I discovered on that stage required immediate legal intervention, he pauses, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Margaret Collins, the retired nurse who confessed to switching babies, was arrested and charged with 23 counts of human trafficking, fraud, and conspiracy. She pleaded guilty to all charges and is currently serving a 15-year sentence in an Ohio state prison. She is 72 years old. She will likely spend the rest of her life there. Images appear on screen, news photos, headlines, courtroom footage. The case exposed an illegal adoption network that operated in 4 Ohio hospitals between 1980 and 1989. Through Margaret's notebook and subsequent investigations, authorities identified 37 babies who were trafficked, more than the 23 she initially confessed to. The additional 14 switches were performed by Dr. Richardson with other nurses he recruited into the scheme. Dr. Thomas Richardson, the physician responsible, died in 1994, but his widow will face civil charges. County General Hospital agreed to a $100 million settlement for the victims. Dr. Phil leans forward, elbows on his knees. But the numbers don't tell the complete story. 27 of the 37 victims have been located and informed. Of those 27, 18 chose to do DNA tests to find their biological families. Some were successful. Some discovered their biological parents had already died without ever knowing what happened to their babies. Some decided the truth was too much to carry and chose to live their lives without further investigation. He takes a deep breath. Sarah Reynolds found her biological mother, Jennifer Hartley. Jennifer was 17 years old when she gave birth in 1983. She was told her baby had died from complications hours after birth. She mourned that loss for 42 years. Their reunion was deeply emotional. They're building a relationship now, slowly, but it's complicated by decades of separation and the pain of knowing this should never have happened. A photo appears on screen. Sarah and an older woman who looks remarkably like her, embracing, both crying. As for Margaret, I visited her in prison 3 weeks ago. She asked me to deliver a message. The screen changes to a recording. Margaret in orange prison uniform, sitting behind glass, speaking through a phone. I know apologies aren't enough, she says, her voice tired. I know there's nothing I can say or do that will undo what I did, but I want all the families to know. I carried this guilt every day, and my son, Michael, he carried the pain of not belonging until it literally killed him. That's my true punishment, knowing that my selfish search for my own lost son caused 23 other children the same anguish that killed Michael. The recording ends. Dr. Phil is back live. So why did I stop recording that day? He asks, looking directly at the camera. Why did I break protocol and turn a television episode into a criminal investigation? Because some things are bigger than entertainment. Some truths are so serious, so urgent, that they demand action, not observation. He stands, approaching the camera. For more than 2 decades, this program has exposed family secrets, confronted destructive behaviors, and helped people face difficult truths. But always within ethical boundaries. What Margaret did cross those boundaries. It wasn't just family dysfunction. It was crime. And my duty, as a host, as a psychologist, and simply as a human being, was to ensure justice was done. He pauses long, choosing his next words carefully. Identity is everything. It's the foundation upon which we build our lives. It's our name, our history, our connection to the past and bridge to the future. When someone steals that identity, especially from a newborn baby, incapable of consent or resistance, they're not just committing a crime. They're committing existential murder. They're killing who that person should have been and replacing them with a lie. His voice rises in volume, passion breaking through his usual control. And the truth? The truth hurts. The truth destroys families sometimes, but the truth also liberates. It gives people the right to know who they are, to decide how to deal with that information, to choose their own paths with complete knowledge of their own histories. He returns to his chair, sitting down one last time. If you're watching this program and were born in Ohio between 1980 and 1989, especially in Columbus, Cincinnati, or Cleveland, and you've always felt something was wrong, that you didn't fit in, that your identity didn't make sense, contact us. The hotline established by the state of Ohio is still active. Resources for DNA testing are available. You deserve to know the truth. Dr. Phil looks at the camera for a long moment of silence. Why do I do this program? He finally asks. Why, after 23 years, do I continue here, listening to stories that are sometimes so dark they keep me awake at night? Because I believe in the redemptive power of truth. I believe people can change, grow, and heal when they face their problems head on. But I also believe there are lines that should not be crossed. And when those lines are violated, my role isn't to entertain, it's to intervene. He stands one last time, and there's a finality to his movement. To Margaret Collins, you destroyed lives in a misguided attempt to save one. You will carry that until the end. To the victims, to the 37 people whose identities were stolen, you survived the impossible. Your resilience in the face of the most fundamental trauma a human being can experience is extraordinary. And to the families who raised these children without knowing the truth, your love was real. Don't let the discovery of the betrayal that was committed against you diminish the years of genuine love you gave. He takes a deep breath, preparing for his final closing. Today, I have no catchphrases. I have no simple advice. Just this: truth matters. Identity matters. And when confronted with an evil that transcends individual problems and becomes systemic crime, even a television program must stop its cameras, set aside entertainment, and do the right thing. Phil looks at the camera one last moment, his expression a mixture of sadness and determination. Thank you for watching. And if you're one of the affected families, I'm sorry, truly sorry. The camera slowly fades out, and for the first time in the history of the Dr. Phil program, there's no background music, no applause, nothing but heavy silence, the kind of silence that follows truths too large for words.